Hi everybody, welcome to Agency Unfiltered. I'm your host, Kevin Dunn, and Agency Unfiltered is a bi-weekly web series and podcast that interviews agency owners from around the world about agency operations, growth, and scale. Episodes can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts, and you can find our videos and full transcripts on agencyunfiltered.com. Today we talk to Blake Kendrick, Director of Operations for Boston-based FullFunnel. Blake talks through his team's approach to reporting, specifically how important an audit of backend schema is to impactful, actionable insights and business intelligence. We talk about data integrity, hygienic fields and properties, deliberate structure, and more. Have your client's data infrastructure set for business intelligence with this episode of Agency Unfiltered. Blake, welcome to Agency Unfiltered. We'll just jump right in. Welcome to HubSpot HQ in Cambridge.
Thank you very much. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
Cool. We're excited to have you. Obviously, the Boston brand is strong with FullFunnel, so obviously appreciate that. What we're going to get into today, it's interesting, right? I think a lot of clients, like you can't have a client engagement without reporting coming up, and it makes sense, right? We have to validate our performance and our impact. But what FullFunnel's discovered is that to extract the value out of reporting, there's a whole lot of intentional work and groundwork that you have to put into the back end or the CRM, the data points that then pull through to the reporting. And so rather than me just butcher it, why don't you just give us the quick overview of kind of how you guys think about reporting and some of the work that has to go into the back end before you see value in it.
Yeah. So there's a couple layers and kind of directions that we approach reporting from when we're setting our clients up for success on that front. One of the major things that you have to do is just understand your schema up front. So we always start with the data dictionary kind of rollout, defining all the fields and everything like that. Mm-hmm.
Fields is in just like across the CRM, so the properties that are in use.
Yeah, and you want to leverage. So one thing that we come into these instances where people have made really custom sort of environment for themselves and capturing a lot of really data that is unique to them. Mm-hmm. And that could be having form questions kind of laid out as individual fields. It could be, the line of questioning that salespeople do or whatever, qualifying questions, things like that. And that's great to capture because as you're going through and working deals and things like that, you want to be able to refer back to that information. But wherever you want to, we try and eliminate or consolidate fields to make sure that we are leveraging default fields. Because in most cases, we talk about HubSpot, we talk about Salesforce as well. The systems are really built to operate a certain way. So for example, Salesforce is a really good example of this. Is you have that division between leads and contacts, and what we see a lot of times is sometimes companies will come in and then kind of forgo leads altogether and go straight to the contacts and accounts. But what ends up being missed there is you lose the power of Salesforce being able to find the marker and kind of the split between, what are our success rates for conversion.
Sure.
So you want to make sure that you're leveraging the default fields as much as you can. And then outside of that, you're also wanting to look at the fields themselves and try and define as much as possible. And what I mean by that is, fewer single line text fields and more drop downs and pick lists.
Right. I think the classic example is like state, right? Do you type in Massachusetts or Mass or MA, but you drop down, it ensures consistency across answers?
It makes it easier in two ways. One, from a user experience standpoint, you're going to be giving your sales reps and other users a really more straightforward approach to how they can enter the system, and you're going to have an easier time managing data integrity and compliance. On the second side of it is when you go back to build your filtered views and lists and reports, if you want to apply those filters, you're going to have a lot more deliberate selection there, and you're not going to kind of miss gaps. So just the same example you just used, if you put in a filter for MA, but some people are typing in Mass, you're going to miss all those Mass records if you're using kind of open text fields. So we look at the use of the objects, the default fields, and then the kind of the organization of the data within those fields in terms of value sets to make sure that everything is kind of concise and deliberate when you're going to build the reports.
Where does this fall in the larger client engagement? Is this like one of the immediate tasks, like an onboarding or a client kickoff?
Yeah.
Like, let's get our hands on all of the data and the structure on the back end to clean everything up if needed before we can get things going?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, usually when we're approaching clients, they want us to, so we do both advisory services and outsourced work. So we'll actually act as an extension of the marketing team or the sales team. And a lot of times they're like, hey, we just need more activity, we need more labor and things like that. And sometimes we'll walk into an environment and we'll be like, well, you're maybe missing some pieces. And really it's always going to be infrastructure first, because infrastructure is going to dictate business intelligence, and then business intelligence is going to dictate, where should we allocate our resources? Should we put more people on the phones? Should we invest more in, paid advertising channels?
Yeah.
That sort of thing. So there is really an order of operations to it. I would say if you were going to take it to the broadest level, you're going to want to establish behavioral policies first, like internally, like how should people be approaching the sale and what steps should they take and things like that. Understanding the questions that you want to ask and what the information you want to get in terms of your regular reporting. And then the next step would be how can we maybe add on to the system's kind of default environment to support those previous two objectives. And then from there, then you're going to get into execution and kind of tweaking and optimizing from there. But
makes sense. How would you split, or what's the rough estimate percentage of clients that have you on that advisory role for this versus the implementation or the execution of it?
A lot of our full service engagements, we end up saying, hey, look, we need to do a full assessment. I mean, the way that we sell our services, we actually do a deep dive audit prior to signing someone on for a full service engagement.
Oh, gotcha. So this comes in before,
Yeah, we need to make sure we know what we're walking into and make sure that we're really taking the right course of action.
Have you been burned before that kind of mandated that as the process?
Yeah, we have had people kind of shirk away from the initial audit. It tends to be our smaller clients that are just really highly price sensitive for that. But we've also worked it out the other way where it's like, okay, let's shelve outsourcing services because really this isn't the best plan for you right now. Like you don't need to deploy more resources. You need to just kind of tweak what's already available.
Yep.
And then we sell that first part of the engagement and kind of work on that for a few months and get them, or weeks or however long it might take.
Depends on how big a disaster it is in the back end.
Yeah. Make sure that they have, a visual into, how is their funnel progression working, making sure they have really precise idea of source attribution for everything that's coming in as well. And we kind of treat that as its own project and just sell that engagement first. Yeah.
Very cool. What's there, if there is any, what's the distinction for this audit between like contact properties versus company properties, deals, like knowing that there's just a ton of different categories of properties inside of HubSpot or any tool that your clients may be using? Does the process change in regards to that category?
Yeah, I would say, so most of the clients that we're dealing with are following a B2B sales process. So it's going to evolve from finding a cold prospect, which you're usually going to be, if you're talking in terms of Salesforce, talking about just the leads object, no other relationships involved there. And you're working that person through and qualifying really at the contact or the person level. Once you have a qualified contact identified and you have some semblance of an idea of, okay, this person's the right fit and they have some intent to purchase as well, then you're going to move on and you're going to kind of use the account as your control center, because ultimately it's the company that's buying your product, not that person, right?
Yep.
Once you finish that second layer of qualification, usually this would be like a handoff between like an SDR, sales development representative, to like an AE, like an account executive.
Yep, for sure.
They verify the quality and they say, yeah, these people do want to move forward. We do have a way to deliver services or products to this group. So let's spin up that opportunity. And then at that point, you're working just in the opportunity and kind of maintaining everything from there. Yeah.
How much coaching comes into that exact process, right? Because everyone's going to use a system in their own unique way.
Yeah.
But how much hand-holding or how much training or coaching goes into having your clients leverage the tools in that sort of process?
Plenty. I would say it comes up a lot.
Yeah.
Usually it's kind of that division, excuse me, that division of, are we working a person at this point, or are we working an account? And it's really going to come down to how heavily are you communicating with an individual to kind of gather information, and that's going to be all your prospecting activity. And then how much are you kind of working with the team more broadly and identifying a solution? That's going to be your company level. So, we do have to teach on that a little bit. I think people, different businesses will come in and in an account-based, marketing or sales strategy. They might be pulling company names first and then finding the contacts. But really you're working the person from the beginning until you know that quality is the way that you at the level that it should be.
Yeah.
You're really going to be working just people from that point.
Sure.
And, yeah.
Makes sense. What would you say is the distinction between having someone migrate systems and now they need an audit of the data that's being migrated versus legacy use of the system, but they just formed bad habits, versus somebody trying to build a practice from the ground up? Do you play in all three of those realms? If not, or if so, I mean, what do you see as the big differences there as the service provider?
Yeah, it's so we're just trying to find the right long-term solution for our clients. So I mean, it's depending on what the sort of makeup of the sales process is going to be. For example, we usually people end up being a lot more comfortable with like NetSuite, or they might have like an ERP or something like that in their infrastructure already. Usually they have that paired with Salesforce. We don't want to shake up that whole process, because warehousing and supply chain management and all that stuff, and that's a whole other beast that goes outside of just the sales process, right? So fulfillment, we don't really play in that category, and we don't want to disrupt that.
Sure.
So we try to, in those settings, work within the legacy environment as much as we can, and just point out areas where it's like, this wasn't defined right, or you need to have your values kind of parsed out a different way here. And as much as we can, doing some additive work rather than corrective work, because it's much easier to just pick something up new and maybe have somebody be like, oh, here's an extra checkbox to check while you're going through your thing, than it is to say, you did it that way,
now you're doing it this way.
Yeah, we're going to shift it.
What's an example of like an additive piece that you've done for a client? Like, what would that look like?
Yeah, any sort of, so we introduce usually, and HubSpot fortunately does this automatically, we introduce tracking for like the became dates, we call them. So the became a lead, became an MQL.
Oh, very cool, yeah, right.
We also introduced an SAL stage as a middle mark, because we're sometimes doing appointment setting or like pre-qualification.
Yeah, right.
And then SQL, et cetera. So we introduce those date stamps, and we leverage automation so that as a sales rep is going in and updating their activity, they're saying, hey, this is the latest pass, we set a meeting. Okay, let's mark that date stamp, let's update that life cycle stage, and that's all just going to happen in the background, and it adds a lot to the reporting side, but doesn't really shake up the sales user experience. On the other side of that, sometimes people will be approaching lead status in the way that they would approach sort of life cycle stage.
Sure.
So,
confusion as to the distinction between the two, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're going in, and I'm a sales rep, and I'm coming into my system, and I'm saying, hey, what do I have to do today? You want to work backward from your furthest priority, furthest part of the sale, back to the coldest people, right? And that's going to be mostly activity based. So you want to say, okay, who do I need to do my second pass follow up with? Who do I need to do my first pass? Something like that. And lead status is really going to be more effective defined as an activity based sort of sequence than it is going to be how qualified is this person?
Right.
And that's going to be really effective, especially if you're hiring new sales teams and sales team members and scaling up. It's really easy for them to be like, what do I have to do next? Than it is for them to understand really fully, like, is this person qualified or not? It's just a more difficult kind of definition there. Sure. If you have less experienced employees. Yeah.
So I mean, the long and short of it, it's not even just auditing how they're using the data or how their information is structured in the CRM, but it sounds like there's also a piece of sales consultancy as well.
Yeah.
Because you have to align those two to get to eventually just reach the maximum impact on some of this reporting.
Yeah. The way that we usually kind of close the deals on these systems audits is we say, hey, listen, we're not talking about shaking up your data and just giving you some new dashboards, right? That's kind of what the takeaway is. But really, we're talking about building on user experience for your sales team, and kind of retraining and building understanding. It's an educational process as much as it is a delivery of
the final output being a dashboard.
Right, yeah.
That makes sense. Talking about the dashboard, actually, let's just assume in this hypothetical scenario, the audit has went really well. Okay. All the data feels really good. The sales process aligns with how the data is supposed to be inputted and used, etc. What are some of the most successful or most impactful reports that your team has been able to put together? Like, what are some of your favorite reports that clients seem to really enjoy or love?
It depends on who you're talking to.
Sure.
So, I mean, you have your VP of sales type of person is going to really be interested in monitoring activity, monitoring production per rep. So breaking out activity types and then the results for those activities, and doing groupings based on, depending on how big the team is, by territories or something like that.
Teams or however.
Yeah. If you're talking about your VP of marketing, or even your your CRO, they're definitely going to be interested in attribution reporting. In Salesforce, you got to do a lot of work, I think, to define some of those fields. We actually find one of the most competent sort of combinations of platforms is Salesforce with HubSpot, because HubSpot is so proficient at detecting inbound sources and things like that. Yeah. More so than maybe Pardot or something like that. That's a really powerful combination. And obviously HubSpot standalone is more than capable of doing that. But you do have to do a lot of upfront work with Salesforce and defining the value sets, making sure those mappings are correct, and doing all that sort of stuff. HubSpot is great with its newer attribution reporting that it introduced. Yeah. In Professional, you have those contract attribution reports that are looking more specifically not just at the sources, but also the content types, right. And having not just first touch, but multi-touch attribution, which those models have been killer. Anytime we bring those up, people are like, "Oh,
that's great!
I didn't even know that." Yeah. And then at the enterprise level, obviously you're getting that dollar value out of it with the revenue attribution. Yeah. So that's definitely been a game changer. We've been looking more closely at that and trying to upsell our current customer base on hey, take a second look at these reports because it's all done for you, and you can kind of answer that question really quickly of where do we put our marketing dollars?
Yeah, 100%. No, you're spot on. I only have one or two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one of these being, let's just say I'm an agency or a service provider or a partner listening in, and the light bulb has gone off. Be like, man, I don't do enough data consultancy or any data audits for my clients. Okay. What's the easiest place, or how should I get started if I want to fold that into my practice?
Sure. I would say before you get started with anything, so you don't really need to be a tech wizard to do those sort of things, because usually a lot of what people need is they just need a pointer on what's the plan going to be.
Sure.
And the way that we structure them, we have three phases that we always abide by. We have our planning and sort of approval phase. So we're going to do that review of your data set and everything, make sure we have the definitions right, make sure we understand everything. Mm-hmm.
And how much time do you think that takes? What is the average time commitment for that sort of?
I'd say, so we usually break it out into weeks. And
I guess depending on the scope, the size of their...
It depends, because you get variables. I mean, I walked into a client where they had... literally 400 custom fields that they had put into their schema for an accounts object in their Salesforce. So that took a long time to dig through. But typically, it's going to be about a week. Let's say you spend 10 hours each week, right? Mm-hmm. Your planning phase is going to take 1 to 2 weeks. Your implementation phase is going to take another week. And then your sort of rollout and training phase, you can probably do that across a week if you want to bundle some training videos or something like that. Yep. But as we said, it's going to be really related to behavioral training and user experience. So
that's the difference between implementation and rollout. Rollout is the behavioral training. Implementation is actually applying the recommended changes to the
technical, creating new fields and changing value sets and things like that. Yeah, so we introduce it in those three phases. So if you have kind of an understanding of okay, as we're doing this, we want to minimize risk as much as we can. That's going to keep you out of hot water. It's going to keep you aligned with your client's expectations along the way. I'd say that's the first look. It's just making sure that you have clear communication, you have documentation of your change logs and everything that you're making as well. Because if anything gets disrupted, you want to go back and kind of undo that as quickly as you can to help anybody. But
where do you guys track that?
We usually just use a spreadsheet that we monitor along the way, but we also use project management tools. We recently had been on Asana, which worked well enough. Yeah. We recently also implemented MavenLink, so we're currently in transition right now, and our team's moving over there. But MavenLink's really great in terms of getting that extra element of budgeting and things like that. Our CFO loves it.
I was gonna say, do you use time tracking in MavenLink as well?
Yeah, we do. We do. It's a little bit different. We were doing Asana with like a combination of Toggle, or some people I know have been using like Harvest and things like that for a while. But yeah, it's a little bit different because in MavenLink you have like timesheets. But yeah, so sorry, back to the original question, I think was, what recommendation can we give? Really nail down the plan, set the expectations, be really communicative along the way, and get upfront approvals on everything.
Sure.
Just to make sure that you're talking to the right person. A VP of sales might be like, hey, this is what we want to see. Can you introduce this and like add this field and things like that? And it might be, an operations person who kind of has been working in the background, maybe as a, part-time admin.
The person that makes the request doesn't necessarily.
Be like, whoa.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So you don't want to interrupt any workflows and things like that. But as long as you kind of stick to those phases and make sure you're planning up front, I'd say that's probably the best place to start. Yeah.
Perfect. Final question. So we ask this, we close every episode with this.
Sure.
Not related to the topic at hand. What is the weirdest part of agency life?
The weirdest part of agency life. I would say, ooh man, that's a stumper. That's
see, we don't put that in the episode brief,
Yeah. The weirdest part of agency life is just making sure that you can balance your time and deal with fires, and also make time for the structured stuff that you have in your regular ongoing projects.
Sure. Yeah. The push and pull of reactive versus proactive.
Yeah. So talking about project management, we have adopted sort of a Frankenstein version of a sprint model, an agile model. And we have a set block of hours that we just reserve and keep in on the side as kind of flex hours. And then we have our set hours that are more structured for certain projects and things like that. And it takes a while and it's an ongoing process, but if you can stick with that and you can kind of keep that balance and everything and make sure you have certain time for client billable work, certain time for ongoing research, and then certain time for kind of internal innovation projects and things like that. And you might divide that up by team. That's something that's a little bit different, but it's something that's really important because as agencies, if we're doing advising, we got to be at the forefront of the knowledge on everything.
Yeah, so. No, you have to have time for those innovation type projects, the research. It's a great answer. Yeah. Cool. Well, that's it for me, man. Thanks so much for coming on. But this has been Agency Unfiltered. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Agency Unfiltered. If you like what you saw, heard, or read, make sure to subscribe to our playlist on YouTube, our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or our newsletter on agencyunfiltered.com. Alongside episode launch notifications, the newsletter also comes with a ton of other helpful, strategically curated agency content from yours truly. And if you want to keep the conversation going or provide a counterpoint to this episode's discussion, tweet me at Kevin_Dunn. I'll see you again in 2 weeks, but in the meantime, keep it unfiltered and let's all grow.